Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's special exclusive subscriber YouTube live stream. This personal conversation with George Anderson. It's going to work a little bit differently than what we typically see in George's monthly Q&As with you guys, and that's because I'm here as the guest host for the day. I'm Nicole, and if those of you out there who have been watching for some time recognize me a little bit, it's because I'm the voice who is usually asking your questions from behind the camera. So today I have come in front of the camera as a special guest host for two reasons. One, because over the years, I've been doing this for 9 years with George. Over the years, some of you have asked me to come in front of the camera every once in a while. So here I am for a special one-time only appearance. And also because for this conversation, we're really going to get into some personal details with George, some things that you would maybe not think to ask during your live Q&As. And I'm also going to be able to add some personal stories about George into the conversation. And if you are a subscriber, you can post your questions in the chat as well. And then we'll get to those as we go through all the questions today. So let's get started, George. You're all set?
Yep. All set.
All right. So the first question I wanted to start with is something that I don't think a lot of people know, but it's something that we've discussed many times over the years, and that's that doing sessions for people that you know can also actually be more challenging for you than doing sessions with strangers. So if you could just tell everybody a little bit about why that is.
Well, people that I know, what can I tell them that I don't already know? And it just, I guess my own cynicism gets involved where I'll swear that somebody said this to me and I'll edit it or not bring it up. Because I have done sessions for family members, but reluctantly, or people I know and then I will be certain that the person I'm doing the session for already told me that. They'll say, no, I never did. I said, no, yes, you did. It's a back and forth thing then. And so that's the only thing that would hold me back from that. And doing them for strangers is a challenge, as long as they have a brain. And you never know. Each session is unique and different to itself. So that becomes, like, to me, how interesting is this going to be, or what's going to come in and what's not going to come in. And that's why I try to caution people, as I always caution them. If you have any preconceived expectations, don't have them. The souls do it their way. They don't do it my way. And yes, it does annoy the hell out of me, but they won't do it your way either. And the souls always use an expression, refuse nothing, ask for nothing. Just realize that they're coming through to spend some time with you as an individual. So they would expect people to kind of be on the ball. But you can't remember everything in 2 seconds. I couldn't do it either. So I will just state that, and so many people will be in contact later after the session saying that they did recognize so-and-so, but they said no. But they're not going to lose sleep over there, but they'll, be frustrated if you didn't come through with recognizing them. But you can't remember everybody in 2 seconds. I couldn't do it either. One thing I do like in the session is when the soul comes through with their personality, especially if they're somebody who seems to have a wacky sense of humor, as I do. That immediately makes me gravitate to them, and they come through very clearly. And I'll enjoy when the subject will say to somebody that's with them, "Oh, doesn't that sound like mom? That's exactly what she would say," or something of that nature. So that's always very interesting. I look forward to that. But sometimes the only thing I noticed lately is I have to approach the session cautiously. I can't, make any assumptions. In other words, I always say I have to keep my schnoz out of it. And as soon as I put my schnoz into it, always comes back and bites me on the rear. Um, by that I meant um, there are most of the sessions are pretty dramatic, and people will have no idea what I hear in that room coming through and reaching out to them. Some of them are really horror stories. Some people came from families that made my upbringing look like nursery school. But, and then on the other hand, there's souls that'll come through and reflect on a Leave It to Beaver upbringing or a very cherished upbringing. So I have to approach it cautiously. Some souls will come through, and confess to substance abuse, things that disrupted family because of that, bad tempers, unhappy marriages. It's just, you never know what's going to come through, and you never know what to expect. And also, some souls have come through who were singularly close with, say, their child or such. And the dad may come through and say he feels he could have been a little closer. And the subject will feel, well, no, because we had a great relationship. But you don't know. The one session I do remember is years ago. Young woman came. She had, and her father-in-law kept coming through and kept apologizing for his behavior when he was on the earth. He didn't go into any detail, but he was very emphatic about apologizing to the family. And I think to one of his granddaughters, if I'm not mistaken. And the woman looked at me as if I had 6 heads. She said, "My father-in-law was a great guy, real family guy, close and so forth." I said, "Well, that's what he's telling me, so I'll just leave it with you. I don't know what else to do." I always leave it with them with a question mark. But what happened is she had gone home and played the session for her family. And in the middle of it, her daughter started crying. And the daughter confessed that he had been molesting her as a little girl for years. And that's what he was apologizing for. And that always stood in my head, that you never really know somebody until they get over there and they really have to face themselves and redeem themselves and atone for their shortcomings here. But the woman, I didn't know she came back. She came to me for another session, and I don't remember her. And he came through again. And I remember there's a man here. I said, "Coming his dad, but he's not your dad. Seems like a father-in-law." And she just went on fire. And she said, "Yeah, he dares to come through. I had him here. I'd wring his neck." I said, "Whoa." And, of course, he tried again to comfort the situation. And she told me afterwards that she had been to me before, even though I had no recollection of her. And she told me what had happened the first time, where she thought, I was completely off center. And then she told me what her daughter, as an adult now, had told her, that he had been molesting her when she was a little girl. And she said, things which would make no difference, but she says, I'd like to go to the cemetery and dig him up and tear him to pieces. I said, well, he's recognized his wrongdoing, so at least he's making an attempt. But how do you rectify something such as that, especially as a parent, and not knowing and having no suspicion whatsoever, no clues whatsoever? And, married man with children and grandchildren. And, here he is molesting his granddaughter. And speaking of that always stuck in my head, that it made me think that I have to really have confidence in the ability and trust what I'm hearing as being a matter of fact, because the person getting the session may not know about what's coming through.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that you originally didn't remember the first session because it was a pretty normal session, right? So it was a pretty average session without anything that you saw out of, that stuck out in your mind, like that someone reached out and said they were sorry. And then, it kind of moved on from there. But now you really recall the second session because now you have the story of something,
that
really...
she had told me after the first.
Right.
But I remember in the first session, she couldn't understand why he was apologizing. And she challenged me. She said, my father-in-law was a great guy. Everybody loved him. He was the pillar of everything. I said, well, that's what he's saying to me. I'll just have to leave it with you. But she had no idea that her daughter was a victim of his pedophilia.
And that's one of the reasons, right, that George's staff and George himself really tells people that it's a really good idea to record your sessions and listen back to them later. Because, sometimes you don't understand the message that's coming through. And sometimes George will ask the souls to, can you sort of clarify this for them? But sometimes it's just something he has to leave with you to take home and sort of, think about it and ponder it a little bit. And then we often do get calls and emails to the office later saying, you know what, I thought he was crazy, or it didn't hit home. And then all of a sudden the light bulb went off, or someone gave them information that made what George told them make sense. So it is interesting that if you're in a session with George and then you say you don't understand, he will ask the souls to clarify. But if they don't, he'll say, they're being insistent. I just have to leave it with you. And it's because the souls are being insistent with you, not that you're being insistent about it, right? So interesting to know. So if you ever do have a session with George, that's, how it could go. And if George is insisting on something, it's because the souls are really persistent about it and have something that they, really want to say. And going back to what you were originally saying in the beginning about challenging yourself a little bit when you're doing sessions for people that I know people who've had sessions with George, and you did a session for members of my family and they asked me to sit in on it. And I remember afterwards he was telling me, oh, they were telling me things, and I kept saying, no, she would have told me that, like, if that was true, or she didn't have an uncle who passed away, I would have known that. And even though you had, it had happened years before, but you had kind of known about it at the time, you kind of, mind goes blank, I guess, at the beginning of the session, and you get information and sometimes you were like double checking yourself on like everything that came through, to the point where the souls said, I think it was my great aunt who said, just tell her what I'm telling you, because you were like fighting her on it a little bit. And then like afterwards, when we talked about what the meaning was, I understood what it was, and I explained it to him afterwards, and he was like, oh, okay, that makes sense now. He goes, but I, kind of threw it out as either something you must have told me or something you never told me, so it couldn't possibly be true. So just an example of how it can be challenging for George. You would think it might be easier for him to do a discernment for someone that he knows, but for those who know George personally and then have had sessions with them, he actually struggles more than we do in the session, where we're understanding things that are coming through, but he's, kind of working twice as hard, I think,
Yes.
to do those sessions, to get us that information.
Because I remember also years ago when I used to travel to other states to do sessions, and this was in Washington State. This woman had come for a session. Her husband had passed on, and it just amazed me, like the silly things that didn't come through, and they whine about it later on. Like she said, her husband had passed, yes, and she said, I don't understand why he didn't impress upon you that he had a thick Cockney accent. Why would you care about that? If you know that, why is he going to impress that on me? I would say, what is he going to do? Show me a scene out of My Fair Lady that I'll get the idea that of a Cockney accent? I mean, you can't get any more waspy and Anglo than me. And yet, I just wouldn't think that would be something that the subject would disqualify the session because that specific point wasn't brought up. You knew he had a Cockney accent, so why does he have to come through and tell you that again?
Right. You say that the souls come to us knowing, that we know what they're talking about, and that they come to us with, we say a lot about this, that they come to us with the message that they feel is important to tell you. Not the message that we want to hear necessarily, but what they think it's important to tell us. And you're not in control, and we're not in control. They're in control of that.
And also, too, I think people have a dreadful misconception about when somebody passes on, that when they go to the world unseen, we in the physical will feel that they know it all of a sudden, and they don't. They'll suddenly understand nuclear physics or that geometry problem or something, and it's not the case. And then they'll bellyache that I can't believe my father never said this because he was into this or whatever. But the thing is, if the soul doesn't feel it's an importance, they're not going to go out of their way, especially, they're punching a hole, even though their world runs parallel with ours. They still have to make the effort to get into our physical presence. And they obviously have more important things to address. And I always tell people they're going to do it their way. So you better get used to it. Don't expect, your grandmother to come through and talk about her cannoli recipe or something. Why? To me, that would be complete horse manure. And that never happens. Or they'll say something that, well, my mother and I worked out a code before she passed on, and she didn't bring that up. Why would you put them on the spot? They don't like being put on the spot any more than we do here. And that's the worst thing you can do to them, is to expect them to do it your way. They're going to do it their way. I don't care how many codes you and your mother worked out. If it doesn't come through, it doesn't come through. And I can't break their arm to do it.
And you shared with your staff over the years a few times when you actually sort of held back a little bit on a specific thing that the souls were telling you about those sitting for sessions, if they were maybe a little mean or something like that, right? So if they were sort of maybe saying unkind things, and you hold that back and you don't necessarily push that through.
Well, because that had happened years ago. I had a man who had come to me for a session, an adult male, and his son had passed on. And I censored. The son told me that when he was on the earth and his father didn't know, told me that he was homosexual. And I said, well, I'm not going to say anything to this father about it. So I censored it out. And he ended up complaining, asking me to do another session. But he complained because he didn't feel it was his son. I said, okay, now it's no holds barred. And he came back again for another session, and I let him have it. And he got a little upset because he said he felt that suspicion for a period of time. And I said, I remember your son told me that in the first session. I censored it out of respect to you and him. And that's why when he complained and came back, I said, now we're gonna duke it out.
And also, I remember you telling me a story one time about a soul who was, in a session and his loved ones were there. I think it was a phone session. And everything that he was coming through, they were like, oh, he wouldn't say this, he wouldn't do that. And the soul told you, they didn't listen to me when I was alive. Why would I think they'd listen to me when I was dead? And that you held back and didn't share with them. But that was, that's the type of thing that sometimes you just keep to yourself and don't share that with the sitters. Right?
Yeah, now I do my best to make sure if you're coming, you're going to hear everything.
Yeah.
And no holds barred, as I said, because then if I try to protect you with sensitivity, they end up whining anyway. So everything comes out in the wash.
So a few changes because of that. But yes, you've had some interesting things come through that the souls have told you, and some things that have just been for your personal knowledge there. So you've talked about over the years that the ability isn't for you, right? It doesn't work for you personally, but the souls have, given you advice over the years and given you impressions about things. Can you tell us about that? It's not like your mom comes to see you or something like that, but you do get some impressions from those in the hereafter.
Yeah. There's some people over there that I certainly still have a bug up my rear about, but justifiably, I feel. There was one night prior, while I was getting ready for bed, and I was in my bathroom, flossing and brushing my teeth, and I suddenly felt this female presence around me, and I realized it was the nun that I had in the 6th grade, who was an absolute bitch. And I think there was something wrong with her psychologically. She used to use me as her personal punching bag. And she was coming to me asking for forgiveness. And I said out loud in my bathroom, I said, do me a favor, sister. Go back to the lower levels where you belong, because you're not getting any forgiveness out of me here or there. So hit the road. And she did. And I, still have my issues, as many people do, with the subject of forgiveness. Many times I feel it's overrated. Yes, it's supposed to be the high spiritual thing we should do, but we've been told that. So we feel, I've done things in my life I'm not proud of, but the hardest part is really forgiving yourself. But it also caused me to get annoyed at my parents, because when you had Meet the Nun Day and they met her, I didn't think about it at the time, but my parents told her that if I gave her any type of problems or whatever, they had she had their full permission to discipline me any way she felt was justified. And as an adult, I thought back on that and I thought, number one, you're telling her I'm a bad person. Number two, you're throwing me at the mercy of somebody you don't even know. So, what? And of course, she ended up taking full advantage of that. And my mother chimed in and said, "Oh, and don't think he'll come home and complain because if he does, he'll get it at home too." So she was in the clear. And she completely traumatized me, seriously. And I think that's why I may be pushing 73, but I still feel like a 12-year-old inside, that I never had gone beyond that age, probably from that. And that's the thing. Like, why would you say that to somebody you don't even know? And then say, and he'll get it worse at home if he complains. And then when We Don't Die initially came out, and people were saying to my mother, how could you have let that happen to him? And they said, well, we didn't know. We didn't know. And I said, yeah, you didn't know because you authorized her to treat me that way. It's probably why I ended up being screwed up in so many ways.
But over the years, the souls have also given you some guidance, right? Some of them have given you guidance over the years. Like souls have told you to kind of stick with your own ability and not get involved in others. Yeah. And then you've also have actually some of your close friends will remind you that sometimes they guide you not to eat or order certain things at a restaurant or at dinner to avoid getting sick. And that has turned out to be important.
Exactly. And I don't want to sound like I'm interfering or thinking I know better or anything of that nature. So, but that did happen where we were dinner guests one night at someone's home, and I heard it wasn't a family member, it was some, I'll say, angelic soul that said, don't eat what's being served to me. And I thought, should I tell the other people? And they thought, well, but then I'm going to really throw a wet blanket on the night. So I just skipped it. And I wish I had, because one of my friends got very ill.
And still holds a grudge about it, I think.
Yeah, he does. Well, I was out years ago with another acquaintance, and the special of the night was the fish they call grouper. And he ordered it. I said, ooh, do you think that's a smart thing to do? And he said, yeah, why? I said, oh, I don't know. It's maybe not a good idea. And sure enough, he ordered the grouper and he spent the night puking his guts up.
So whenever I'm at a restaurant and I'm saying, I'm thinking about getting this, and George is like, I change my mind immediately and change my order immediately.
Yeah, because there are so many times people, sadly, I mean, nothing grosses me out more than walking into a public restroom and somebody doesn't know how to flush a toilet. And if they didn't flush the toilet, chances are they didn't wash their hands either. And they can cause you to get sick by touching you. I'm not the touchy-feely type. I kind of like what they do when I was in Japan working. The Japanese believe in bowing. I like that much better than handshaking, because this way you're not having the physical contact. To me, it's very cultural and respectful. But, you just don't know what people do in their personal lives. And I don't want to become a victim of that by putting trust in them that they're hygienic.
And one of our viewers wants to know, are you able to shut down the spirits from contacting you, like in your downtime?
Yes, I would say so. The only time I'll really feel them around is on a day when when I have appointments scheduled. I might start to get some information prior to making the call or before the person arrives at the hotel. The soul may come to me and say, they're going to be your 1:30 appointment. And, but I don't remember what somebody said to me here or hereafter 2 seconds ago. So even though they say that, it's not until the session begins and they remind me of it that I remember. And of course, we'll remember that this was the soul. And I'll tell the subject, I'll say, your mom came to me before you even got on the phone with me. She paid me a visit. And I remember the young lady that I go to for a haircut. She had immigrated here from Poland, and her grandfather was extremely Catholic. Well, Poland, what do you expect? But it was interesting. The morning that I was getting ready to go to see her to get my haircut, I had never met him, but he had written a note to me because I had purchased a picture of Our Lady of Czestochowa, and he wrote me a thank you note for it. And I was getting ready, and I never met him personally, but I felt him around. And even though his English was pretty limited, he told me who he was, that he was Magdalena's. It's funny, you hear the Polish, but it comes out English in my head. And he told me that he had passed away. He came to pay me a visit to thank me for the picture of Our Lady. And I just found it interesting, but basically just kept it to myself. And when I arrived for the appointment, the first thing she told me was that her grandfather had passed away. And I said, really? Because he visited me this morning. And I told her all about it. And that I felt was quite interesting, because I was scheduled to get my hair cut, but I didn't expect I would be giving her any personal messages.
And if we go back to your first discernment, was actually the one that you first ever did, was actually an unintentional discernment, wasn't it?
Yes, there was one of the kids in the neighborhood that I hung out with. His grandmother had passed, and I told him that I felt her around him. But it wasn't a session like where somebody makes an appointment and I do the whole works. I just mentioned that to him. But he was surprised. How did you know? He says she just passed away the other day. But I said, well, because she's around you. I just took it very matter-of-factly.
Right, because you didn't think that was strange because you were just a child at the time.
Yeah,
How old were you?
exactly. Probably about 9, 8, somewhere around that.
Yeah, and so you didn't really think there was anything wrong with the things that you were seeing or doing until some people started to tell you things were wrong.
You don't think something is wrong until somebody tells you it's wrong and makes a sincere impression with you that it's wrong. Like, I know it's wrong to go out right now and pull out a gun and start killing people at random, so I don't do that. But there are individuals who may have hang-ups from childhood or such because they were told by their parents or somebody. Just because somebody's older than you doesn't mean they're smarter than you. And they will tell them that that's wrong or that's a sin or whatever. And I always think to myself now, when did the creator die and leave you in charge? These people start coming up with that, saying, well, quoting the Bible or any of that sort of hootenanny. I always tell them I'm not a fundamentalist, and I'm especially not a Protestant fundamentalist. So don't waste your time on me. That's the response you're going to get.
And so about how many years was it until you sort of realized for yourself, this isn't wrong, this is just who I am?
Well, as I got older, I also was more comfortable with it because society in general started to have more of an openness about it. And I started doing sessions for individuals and realized that it could become something that could be very comforting for people. But as I always state, I'm not the type I'm not a person that enjoys praise. I see myself as being merely the instrument, and I look at it now as my vocation. And that's all it means. When people thank me afterward, I said, don't thank me, thank your loved ones. I'm just the instrument. It's just my vocation. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And I prefer it that way. I don't like singularizing myself. And one thing the souls have been very emphatic on, and I'm glad that I've always heeded their advice. They told me never associate yourself in any way, shape, or form with any other so-called person who claims to do what I do or such, they said. And anybody who attempts to control me or the ability or get too friendly with it have told me that they will be annihilated. And that's happened. So I'm glad I stuck to my guns on that.
Yeah, so he is actually very strict on that policy, and we're clear with that on everyone who reaches out to us. We have a viewer who's asking about, what you went through in your life, especially as a child and young adult. Do you think that it sort of allowed you to be more sensitive towards animals the way that you are, especially animals who were abused and things like that because of what you went through in your life?
Well, I think that would go back to when I received Holy Confirmation. I took St. Francis as my confirmation name, but have always, tried my best to be kind to animals and encourage others to do the same. There were times that, there could be, one of my cats caught a mouse in the basement or something. And I love when they bring it up because they figure it's playtime, or they leave it on the front step or something. And, but nature takes its course in any case. But the one thing I have found out from the souls over there the one thing they do have a problem with, and I expressed this to my older brother because he was great for going out with friends and hunting. And the souls told me that's a big no-no. If it's for the purpose of survival, you really have not much of a choice. But if you're just going out and doing it as a sport, like in other words, you blow some poor deer's head off who's drinking in a stream or something, what's that supposed to do for you? Make you feel more manly or such? I think I had it out one time with a traditional Catholic priest, and he had converted from the Church of England to traditional Catholicism. Now, spiritually, I consider myself traditionally Catholic, but spiritually only. In any case, he saw one of my, at the time, TV shows, and I wanted to see his opinion because I remember Joel Martin saying to me on the commercial break, he said, you probably added years to that older man's life and his son, because there was a father and son in the audience that I was told to discern for, not by them, by them. And it turned out the man had recently lost his wife and the son's mother, and she came through because she knows it's like the hereafter has told me, the world unseen has told me, it's more difficult to be a widower. And because men are more can have things. So I kind of blame society for that, because we're taught that the men just automatically pass first. And if you have an A+ relationship and your wife goes first, not necessarily the case. Men do not like being widowers. And they've also said men are more frustrated here. Not that women aren't, but men more so, because men have to act a certain way, be a certain way, keep things to themselves. And I'll have to wait till it comes back to me because I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
This is what happens sometimes. So we call it, sometimes you can't land the plane, right? So
yeah, exactly.
If you've watched the live streams before, you've seen it. Sometimes he'll go off on a tangent. But, I think that that's part of sometimes how George's mind works. He's got the souls up there. And we always say, if we've ever been sitting together at dinner or something, we'll all be chatting. And all of a sudden, George kind of like floats away from the conversation. And he seems to be sort of in his own little space. And I always say, it seems like his consciousness is up here where the rest of us are down here. He's kind of like up here a little bit sometimes. And I think that's sometimes what happens when you lose your train of thought. You got a lot going on.
It just came back to me.
Yeah.
It was, so that priest wrote me what I found to be a very rude letter, telling me what I was doing was the work of the devil, beware, beware, and all this, that especially because during that session, the father and son had recently had to put the family dog to sleep. And they were so happy to hear that the mom, when she came through, declared that the animal was there with her. And this priest insisted that that would never happen. I was like, but why not? Didn't St. Francis preach to the birds? Why did different saints show kindness and love and rescue toward animals? Were they on drugs? And then, of course, I don't get the answer from him. So I said, well, that's the typical Catholic answer. It's called the grand silence. They don't say anything. But I said to myself, you ought to go back to being an Episcopalian.
And there it is. He usually does come and find his boy and land that plane and get out what he meant to get out for the answer to the question. Speaking of pets, someone actually had guessed ahead of time. We said there was going to be a mystery guest host. Someone thought it was going to be one of your kitties who was going to be guesting with you on the live stream here. For those of you who've watched George's live streams for many years, in the past, your past pets, Chloe and Hermie always made lots of appearances in those. Back then it was Facebook Lives. And if you haven't seen those, we'll be posting some of those up starting, next month. We'll start posting up some of those older lives and videos for you. So you'll get to know Hermie and Chloe a little bit. But you have two cats now who are much more camera shy than your past pets.
Yeah, Nikolai, stranger comes in the house, he disappears. I don't even know where he goes. Constantine, he's okay with me, but he has yet to make his debut on one of these live events. I don't even know where he is now. He tends to not seek it out. But I will tell you one thing. We certainly do miss Chloe and Hermie.
Yes.
They were adorable. I know they're in the world unseen, and I know they're in a happy place. But I'll be selfish. Still would rather have them here with me.
Which I know many of your viewers can relate to.
Exactly.
Many of your viewers are animal lovers and have pets of their own or have had pets who have passed. And they all kind of, share in that with you.
And I think also, unless you've had a pet for so many years that you have loved and cherished, it's torture when you have to make the decision to have them put to sleep. I mean, you're doing the best thing for them because you don't want them to suffer. But it is a horrible moment. I remember I had a cat years ago for 18 years, and I took her into the vet, and the vet basically told me she was on her last legs. And grown up, male or anything, you just burst out crying because you don't know what else to do. And my parents were still alive at that time in this physical world. They lived out in Arizona, and I called them and told them I had to have her put to sleep. And I could tell my mother got a little choked up and told my father, and he got on the phone. He was like, "Oh, you're kidding." I said, "Yeah, I had to put her down." But I remember, like Chloe and Hermie, they definitely were very loving, and I'm just glad they were able to have such a happy life with me at the time that they were here. One thing I have to admit that I find fascinating about the ability, I used to think that it worked off my brain. And the doctor I did the seminar with in Pennsylvania, what was his name again?
Evan.
Yeah, Evan Alexander.
Evan Alexander, yeah. And we had dinner that night, and I was sitting next to him, and he had been at the presentation and had seen me discern and such. He was quite open-minded to it and very receptive. But he heard me say sometimes it seems to charge my brain up too much. He says, no, it's not working with your brain. It's working with your subconscious. And I didn't quite understand. And he explained the subconscious is the part in your head that absorbs, or it's like a computer, absorbs all the memories and information. And I never really thought about it until then when I started doing sessions, and even though it's not a two-way conversation when I'm doing a session, many times somebody's loved one is playing games with me, it seems. And I'm like, do me a favor. I take this seriously and you should too. Don't play ring around the rosy with me. But it always amazes me how they do it. I would love to find out scientifically. How do they know to get into my subconscious and show me something that they know will interest me and it applies to the subject I'm doing the discernment for? It's amazing, whether it be a name, a situation, a saint, something. It just, how do they know to do it from that world unseen? How do they get in there? Sometimes it almost feels as though I can feel them in there shuffling it around, trying to find some memory or something they know that will attract my attention immediately. Something to do with history, music, literature, something of that nature.
And you sometimes do, for entertainment purposes only, past life sessions. So one of our viewers wants to know what a past life session would be like.
Well, the past life session, I would say to you beforehand, this definitely is for entertainment purposes because you really can't prove anything. There's one lady I've done a few for, and I recall it came to my attention that in another life she had been female and she was a Russian peasant, and she had passed away from drinking unpasteurized milk. So she must have had a hell of a time when those parasites got into her system. And after it was over, she couldn't help but tell me she was knocked off her feet when I said that, because she said, that's one thing I've always hated in life is milk. Says, I never wanted it. I always despised it. And I said, probably because you're carrying over that memory in the subconscious from that. And, why are we attracted to certain people or places in this world? Now, I had never gone to Newport up in Rhode Island. And yet last springtime, I did go up with two good pals, and I just automatically felt at home, felt that I had been there before. And of course, as those beautiful mansions, maybe I did live during the Gilded Age, who knows? And I love the series on TV, The Gilded Age. And I love the fact that it brings out so much of what it was like in American history for people of color, as well as women, and, such prejudices people had, and where women didn't have, the choice to find true love, that they could be sold to the highest bidder almost. And but Newport is someplace I felt very much at home and did have a lovely time there, and hope to go back again this year as well. I've had people ask me if I because I try not to go up during the high season because everything's so expensive. And somebody said, oh, do you have a place up there? I said, no, unfortunately. Gilded Age is not mine anymore. But it's wonderful that people that can afford some of those homes that we were in. The last time we were up there, found out that Mrs. Astor's home had been sold, and whoever bought it, it's not open to the public anymore. It was called the Breakers. No, not the Breakers. I can't remember what. Beechwood. Her home was called Beechwood, and they had bought it for $10 million. And I thought to myself, whoa, do I wish I could do that?
Yes. And well, you've actually every once in a while told me something about one of my past lives. Years ago, when I was first dating my husband, he had said one night we were just out and he said, "You guys were lovebirds in past lives, but more than one past life, so multiple past lives." So every once in a while, you'll just come out with something.
You're soulmates now, just
We're
as you were then.
Yes, we are soulmates now. Yes. So it continues on. And when you hear from the spirits, when the souls are talking to you, are you hearing them in their own voice? Or are you hearing them kind of like in your voice?
I'm feeling them more. It's more, I'll say I hear them, but what I'm really doing is feeling them. And I'll feel their presence. I can feel somebody over there speaking another language, even though I don't know what it is. And I'll always bring that up. But I always play devil's advocate. I say, you couldn't say that to me, not with my waspy name, that there was another language in my family's past, because it certainly wasn't. But the thing is, I think my ability is more clairsentient. I think it's more sensing and feeling. Sometimes I may, not all the time, but I may see somebody in a session out of the corner of my eye and can give a nominal description of what they may look like. Because it's made me wonder about the Holy Day of Obligation in the Church of the Assumption, where we were taught that the Blessed Mother was raised into heaven bodily. But at the apparitions that people have had in Lourdes and in Fatima, she's in a spiritual form, but not in a physical form. So I kind of question that, but that's, the church's belief, and I still would respect them for it, even though I don't think being bodily raised into heaven is accurate. I think she was spiritually raised, but not bodily.
And let's just get in one more question before you finish for the night. You do a lot of artwork, all the time, and sometimes you say you feel impressed, to do specific artwork. How have the souls guided or influenced your artwork over the years?
Well, usually I'm starting new creativities. I'm no what's his name, Monet or anything, but certain geometrics attract me, and so I have done them and have sold them. Collages, pieces, that canvases I've done and have sold them as well. And I'm glad that they inspire me with that, because it's through creativity that I get the chance to de-stress and have something to do besides twiddling my thumbs.
All right. Well, thank you, George, for sharing those personal details and personal stories tonight with everyone. And as always, to find out more information about George, you can go to georgeanderson.com, and that's also where you can click a link to book a session if you're interested. He does personal sessions in person, and he also does them via the phone. And as for you, you say there's no difference between the two.
No, there's not.
There's a difference, I know, for a lot of the viewers, because some of you just want to see him in person. But for on George's end of things work the same for both those telephone sessions and for the in-person sessions. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel for more videos. And you can also follow on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, X now.
All the things I have no idea what they are.
That George's staff helps him with, because he's not joking when he says he's, not good with technical things. He does not even know how to use a cell phone, and that's true. If you asked him to make a phone call with a cell phone, he'd look at you like you were crazy. It frightens him a little bit, I think.
And frankly, to be honest, I hate cell phones.
Yes. So there, we're probably all better off without them anyway. All right. So have a good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you very much for being with us. All the best to you and yours here and hereafter.
Okay. And you will see George again, but you will hear me again in the background.
Yes. But at least you get to see how pretty she is.
Thanks, George. Have a good night, everyone.